Hi everyone, it's Erin, and today I'll be recreating this cool illustration by DiCicco that he did of the evil queen from Snow White. And I've got my gouache, I've got a pencil eraser, I've got some Liquitex, I've got some water and my paintbrushes, and I'm starting with a drawing. So this is for the Villain series, and Gil DiCicco will be talking about who that is. But this was not a piece of concept art. This was an illustration made in 2000 for Disney and was released as a limited edition print. And I came across it and thought it was really cool. I love the image of the queen herself. She's looking pretty fierce, but also in the background, the magic mirror and how it's done in more of a painterly watercolor fashion, and then the queen is done in a more graphic, classic, animated look. So I really enjoy the way the two come together, and I thought it was a powerful image and wanted to recreate it. So here I go. And I'm starting by drawing out the composition. I've been getting a little bit more confident in drawing these out first. A lot of the time I just go for it with the paint, which tends to work better with a Mary Blair piece where everything is, sort of solid shapes and solid colors. But for something like this, where there's, a more, I guess, realistic looking character or elements, I just feel more comfortable getting it all drawn out. And I'm using an HB pencil, I believe, so it's not too smudgy. And the drawing itself isn't the best, but I'm blocking things in and erasing as I go and sort of fixing things up. As always, I just keep my pencil on the canvas the entire time. I'm barely lifting my pencil up and just looking at that reference as often as possible. And the dimensions of this piece, I got them wrong. So halfway through, I had to take one of the pieces of masking tape off, washi tape off, and then retape it. But now the dimensions are pretty good. I did make the face of the magic mirror guy a little bit too squishy, but that's okay. Who doesn't love a squishy face? We're going to leave it like that. But yeah, just getting this all blocked in. I'm using watercolor paper today. And this watercolor paper is a cold press, and I'll put the information down in the description below. So I'm starting off with mixing up some. Oh no, what am I starting here? I'm doing the background first. So I am working out the more watercolor looking background. I am using acrylic gouache. I'm doing the magic mirror dude first, and starting with the lightest color. So I'm starting with where I see the yellow, and there's two yellows. We have a lemon yellow, which is a cool yellow, and then the warmer yellow just down there in the chin. And I'm working quite wet, so I'm adding more water than I typically do to the acrylic gouache, so that it is behaving more like watercolor in that it can sort of blend and mix and create some sort of blooms and bleeds, which typically is what watercolor is so well known for, the way it mixes when you work wet on wet. So I'm doing that here, and I'm making a few different hues or different values of the hue. And the hue is this sort of greeny cyan, which is made by mixing cyan, black, a little bit of white. I have a little bit of yellow on my palette so that I can get a range, and then I can just work wet on wet. And it is a loose process, this background. It's not going to be exactly like the original because the piece, when you work wet on wet, things are pretty spontaneous and there's not a lot of control, but I can see where it's lighter, I can see where it's darker, and I'm just kind of going for it and putting in the darker first and then the lighter, which isn't typically what you would do. So with watercolor, you would start light and then work your way to the dark. But because I'm using a more opaque medium, I put in the dark and then putting the light over top of it, and that works. So that is one of the biggest difference between using gouache and using watercolor. And I should say acrylic gouache, because acrylic gouache is different than traditional gouache. It's quite different, has a different binder. They're both opaque, but with acrylic gouache, you cannot reactivate it. I should also mention at this point that, well, here you can see this face. The color is very, very watered down so that I'm getting a higher value and more transparency there. But I should mention that I'm also using Liquitex, which on the bottle it says acrylic gouache, but it actually is not acrylic gouache. It is just a matte, I shouldn't say just, but it's a matte acrylic. So there's no gloss medium that's been added to Liquitex. So it is literally just an acrylic that is matte. It is very different than gouache, and acrylic gouache is a hybrid of traditional gouache and acrylic paint in that it has more pigment added to it than the Liquitex. There's a lower pigment load in the Liquitex. And so when you use acrylic gouache, like the Holbein stuff that I use, it is a punchier color. You'll have more saturation in your color. So yeah, I'll talk more about that in future videos because I am learning a lot more about the difference between the three mediums that I'm using, which are traditional gouache, which I'll be bringing back into the channel more, and then the Holbein gouache, which is acrylic gouache, which is a hybrid, and then the Liquitex, which is an acrylic that's matte. Okay, back to the painting. I'm layering. I'm still doing light and dark, alternating between the two. And this is one of the benefits, as I was saying, of using gouache, whether it's acrylic gouache or traditional gouache, is that you can go light, dark, because the lighter paint, it is matte, it's opaque, so it doesn't have to be matte, but it's opaque, so you can paint over top of the dark. And I really enjoy that rather than watercolor. For me, watercolor is a lot trickier because I have to sort of think ahead of time, laying down my lightest washes first and then building to darker. And I like going back and forth. I like going light to dark, dark to light, and sort of playing around with the two. It feels a lot looser, a lot less. I'm not thinking about things as much. And I enjoy not having to think. I tend to think way too much all the time. So yeah, it's one of the reasons I like painting. So if I can get away with not thinking, awesome. And you can see this process is very paint, I usually use the term painterly because I'm coming in with my paintbrush and creating these marks and these strokes very quickly and letting my brush do a lot of the work. Which sounds weird. Like, of course you're going to let your brush do the work when you're painting, but when it's more graphic and it's not painterly, it's more like filling in shapes, right? It's a lot more like painting by numbers. I already know what color I'm going to use. I'm going to fill in a shape and I'm going to have it, be flat and not tonal. But in this case, painterly means like paint dabs, strokes of paint, being able to see the shape of the brush, being able to sense the painting, rather than being graphic and filling in solid shapes. So this background is very painterly and a lot of fun to do because, I'm looking at the original piece and I'm trying to follow where it's light and dark, but I'm not being as, I'm not trying so hard to copy it exactly. I am allowing this more energetic sort of painterly stuff to happen and just using the original as a guide rather than trying to replicate it exactly. And I really love the end result. I started this feeling quite nervous. I was like, oh God, this is going to be tough. And, it feels a little daunting looking at all the different paint strokes and the different values. But once I got going and I had my paint mixed out onto my palette, onto my wax palette there, I had all the colors that I needed. Plus I knew I could add water to make things more transparent or higher in value. Which also means just lighter. Once I had all that set up, then doing this was quite easy and quick. Of course, this is sped up, but I still worked quickly for this background. And yeah, I thought it turned out pretty good. And now I'm just doing some of the more defining lines here using my number 6 brush. And as always, I love the number 6 because it holds a lot of paint. So you can see I'm doing this entire all the details of this face without reloading my brush, but using the very tip of the brush where it's nice and pointy and yeah, just getting those details in, and then adding in some darks. Now that the background's completely dry, I can see where I want it to be a little bit darker, doing some defining there behind the crown, and yeah, building it up that way. So it does take a little bit of patience, but not as much as watercolor, because gouache and acrylic paint in general dries a lot faster, so I don't have to wait around for too long, and I can always get out my blow dryer. And now I'm mixing up a very, very, very light cream. So the collar of her incredible cloak, I love this costume. This outfit that she wears is just one of my favorites, but I'm using white with a little bit of yellow mixed in. And then I realized, I don't like, that was like a Jerry Lewis sound. I wasn't into that line. I thought, oh no, that I went over the line. So I just quickly remixed a color that was similar to the background. See, this is great about a painterly background, is you can't really tell that I've remixed a new color to redefine the collar. But yeah, painting in, and this cream color is brighter than white. Sometimes white, depending on what colors you have around it, just won't feel as bright as it will if you add a tiny bit of yellow. So if you have Naples yellow, that's traditionally the best thing to add to white, to get this really nice, bright, glowing white, or cream, I guess technically it would be. And I think I did 3 coats, so letting it dry completely and then doing another coat. And then her skin tone is, I just used that mixture that I had, the yellow and white, and added just a tiny bit of true red and a little tiny bit of blue. I mixed in a little tiny bit of cyan, and then you can see I made a skin tone, and then I'm making one that's slightly more browny for the shadow of the neck. So just basically adding all the colors that I added for her skin tone, just adding more with a tiny bit more black. And now we're doing the crown color. So the color of her crown is gold, and there's also the gold around her neck. And so typically, not always, but typically gold will be a mixture of yellow and black and white, sometimes with a tiny, tiny bit of red mixed in to warm it up. Black and yellow, as I'm sure many people know, and especially if you've been watching this channel, I talk a lot about how mixing black and yellow together will create a really lovely green. Sometimes I call it the exorcist green, but that's because black has a green bias. Or no, sorry, a blue bias. So when you add black with yellow, because black has a blue bias, of course, yellow and blue make green. Now, if you add way less black to it, you'll get a sort of greeny yellow, which gold has that slightly mustardy, greeny tone to it, or hue to it. So that's what I've done. And now I've added a lot more red to that mix to make a goldeny brown, just sort of a darker, a darker, warmer hue for the outlines around the crown, for the details. And now we're going to mix up purple for her dress. And purple, a nice true, I'm going to say vibrant, but a real true sort of, you could call it like a Barney purple, or we're getting closer to that kind of purple. You want to use a warm blue and a cool red. So I've got my ultramarine blue, I've got my primary magenta, doing a little swatch test there, and some white. I've thrown some white in there, but this creates a really lovely purple. Not to say that other purples aren't lovely, but if you want a more like a truer purple, those are the colors you mix together. I've added a bunch of white to do the trim of her dress here. And I just wanted to mention, if you mix together a warm red and a cool blue, or a warm red and a warm blue, you will get purples, but just more of like an eggplant purple or an aubergine. You'll get these less saturated purples. So yeah, so we've used, again, the warm blue of the ultramarine and the cool red, which is the magenta. And we've got this lovely purple. I think looking at the original, I could have shifted this a little bit more to the warm. I could have added just a tiny bit more of the magenta, but it does turn out quite nice. Getting in this first coat, being very careful around the hands here. And, you know, I could have done her cloak first or her dress first and then painted the hands over top, because again, you can go light over dark when you're using acrylic gouache, but I did not do that. And the reason why is because I like to paint dark elements after I do the light elements, because if anything went wrong with that hand, then I can kind of cut into it with the darker color and fix things up. But it's really just however you like to work. I just find that it's more efficient to do the lighter areas first, do the dark afterwards. I always do the black last. Because yeah, it's really hard to cover black or darker colors, even with gouache, which is an opaque medium. It can be a little more painstaking. So now I'm creating like a shade, not like a shade. I am creating a shade of this purple by adding a tiny bit more black. I think I also added a little bit more ultramarine and maybe just a tiny bit of magenta as well, so that I can do the shadowed areas of her dress. So let's talk a little tiny bit about the evil queen. The evil queen also, I found out her name is actually Queen Brunhilde, which you don't hear in the movie. That's in the original book. I don't think you hear it in the movie, but in the movie, she was known as the evil queen, and she was played by Lucille Laverne. And she was originally supposed to be really frumpy, which is so strange to imagine, because the final design, she's just this incredibly elegant, beautiful, somewhat sexy. Let's give it to her. She's a foxy queen. But she was based on this youthful queen character from the movie She, which came out in 1935. And if you look at the pictures, I'm actually going to put a picture here. She really does look like that character. I love the headdress thing that she wears underneath of her crown. It's pretty cool. Yeah, that's the queen. There's not much to say about her. She was a magician. She was into black magic, and she had like a lab where she did her alchemy and her magic, which is pretty cool. And very interesting character, because she's human, but she has these powers, right? And Gil, who originally painted this piece, born in 1943 and passed away in 2019, was an illustrator, a commercial artist who worked on TV commercials. He worked for government films doing illustrations. He worked for the LA Times, Hanna-Barbera, and Disney, where he created a lot of these limited edition pieces, or pieces that were then sold as limited edition prints. He was an animation apprentice at age 15, and then he took night classes at the Art Institute of Chicago, where he was from. There you go. Not much else to say about Gil. He illustrated a lot of books, was a very talented illustrator that worked in many styles. So there you go. And now we're doing your eyebrows. So I have to say, those eyebrows are pretty bushy. She's got kind of like late 2000s, mid 2000s eyebrow action going on there. And then this last, look at this. Whoops. I gave her eyelashes that are way too thick. And yeah, oh well. I mean, I kind of fixed it a little bit. I got in there and put some white paint and tried to fix it up. But I think overall, this might be my favorite face that I've painted for this channel, because usually the faces end up looking pretty, I don't know, crappy. But this face, a little more refined. I think I was more focused this time, really, paying attention, except for that one eyelash issue. But overall, I think the face turned out quite nice. Getting in there with the black and just being so careful not to ruin that detail on the bottom of the crown. And yeah, I watered down my black a little bit so that it's a bit smoother, a little bit easier to work with. And then I did a second coat. And yeah, this part, it is a little nerve-wracking, because I'm like, oh man, I have to be really careful not to get paint into that collar. But I do okay. And spinning my canvas around a lot. So if you get dizzy easily, maybe look away, because I'm getting dizzy looking at this. I got dizzy while I was editing this too. But yeah, I've got a new setup. Let me know if you think the lighting is working for this, because you can see the shadow of my head. So I will be more aware of that for the next video. my frizzy hair, but yeah, the new setup is great because I can paint at night now, and I have a lot of light. I just have to figure out how to get the shadows out of there. The other thing I did want to mention is if you want to paint with me, I'm having a paint night over Zoom. It's a 3-hour painting party where we're going to be replicating a piece of concept art from Cinderella made by Mary Blair originally. It'll be an easy piece. You'll only need 3 colors. So if you want more information, it'll be in the comments or in the description below. It's on April 3rd, Thursday night. I hope you can come. It'll be fun. It's only $25. Putting some final details here on her lovely necklace piece, which I'm guessing has magical quality to it, or it's charmed in some way. And there we go, all done. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. See you soon.